For 12 straight years, tens of millions of ordinary people peeled little game pieces off French fry boxes and soda cups, genuinely believing they had a real shot at winning $1 million. They didn't. Almost every single major prize, the cars, the cash, the $1 million top prizes, had already been quietly stolen before the game even started, funneled through one hidden network to fake winners who had never bought a single meal to earn them. This wasn't a rumor. It wasn't an internet conspiracy theory. It was confirmed by the FBI in federal court after one of the strangest undercover investigations in American history, one that involved agents posing as a documentary film crew just to catch people bragging about a crime on camera. This is the true story of how one man, with one specific job, quietly stole almost $24 million from McDonald's biggest promotion ever and nearly got away with it completely. Starting in 1987, McDonald's launched a promotion based on the board game Monopoly, printed directly onto food packaging, fries boxes, soda cups, sandwich wrappers. Peel off a game piece, match it to a property on a mini Monopoly board, and you could win anything from a free small fries all the way up to a genuine $1 million cash prize. It became one of the most successful marketing promotions in fast food history. Sales measurably spiked every single time the game ran. Customers loved it specifically because it felt fair, a straightforward game of luck available to literally anyone who bought a meal. No purchase minimum required to enter for the top prizes through mail-in alternates. McDonald's didn't run the game entirely in-house. They hired an outside marketing agency, a company called Simon Marketing, to physically manage the entire process, printing the winning pieces, distributing them randomly across the country, and guaranteeing, contractually, that the game was completely fair and truly random. The odds themselves were published, audited, and printed right on the packaging, exactly like a state lottery, because legally, a promotion of this size, running in nearly every McDonald's location across the country, simply couldn't operate without that appearance of verified fairness. Behind the scenes, printing these game pieces was an enormous logistical operation. Millions of individual stickers manufactured at specialized printing facilities, then randomly, deliberately scattered across shipments to restaurants nationwide, specifically designed so that no single person could predict or control where any particular winning piece would physically end up. On paper, it was an almost perfectly designed system. In practice, it had exactly one weak link, and that weak link had a name, a badge, and full access to the building where it all began. The person Simon Marketing put in charge of physically securing those high-value winning pieces was a former police officer named Jerome Jacobsen, who everyone simply called Jerry. His official title was Director of Security. His entire job existed because a promotion worth this much money needed someone trustworthy managing the actual physical winning tickets before they were mixed randomly into the national supply chain to guarantee nobody could cheat. He had direct, essentially unsupervised access to the printing process itself, the actual physical winning game pieces representing millions of dollars in prizes, before a single one of them was randomly distributed to a single restaurant anywhere in the country. He was, quite literally, the one person on Earth positioned perfectly to make sure the game stayed honest, which made him also, quite literally, the one person on Earth perfectly positioned to make sure it didn't. According to Jacobsen's own later confession, the very first theft wasn't even elaborate. Sometime around 1989, just 2 years into the promotion, he simply pocketed a single winning game piece worth $25,000 during the physical printing and packaging process, and personally handed it to a family member instead of letting it enter the random national distribution. Nothing happened. No alarms. No audits catching a discrepancy. The security process meant to catch exactly this kind of theft had a massive blind spot, because the person responsible for detecting fraud was the same person committing it. That first successful, undetected theft appears to have completely changed his calculation. If a $25,000 prize could disappear without consequence, what about $100,000? What about $1 million? Over the following years, what started as a single isolated theft slowly evolved into something far larger, far more organized, and far more dangerous. Stealing winning game pieces was only half the problem. Jacobsen couldn't simply cash them in himself using his real name without raising immediate, obvious suspicion, since his job title alone would connect him instantly to the scheme. So instead, he started recruiting people to claim the prizes on his behalf, in exchange for a negotiated cut, sometimes 50%, sometimes less, funneled back to him through associates. His first recruits were people he already knew and trusted, family, friends, acquaintances from his community in Florida. But as the stolen prizes grew larger, into the hundreds of thousands and eventually millions of dollars, he needed a wider, more reliable pipeline of people willing to publicly pose as legitimate winners without asking too many questions. That's when the scheme connected to an entirely different criminal world, associates with reported ties to organized crime, including the Colombo crime family in New York, who specialized in exactly this kind of thing, finding people willing to quietly launder illegal money through a completely legal, publicly celebrated prize claim. Investigators later mapped out an entire layered recruiting structure underneath Jacobsen, sometimes described almost like a pyramid. He rarely dealt directly with the final winner himself. Instead, he worked through a small handful of trusted senior recruiters, sometimes called finders, who each maintained their own separate networks of people willing to claim prizes for a cut. One particularly prolific recruiter alone was later connected to dozens of separate fraudulent winners across multiple states, an entire regional operation built quietly underneath a fast food board game. Every layer in that chain took its own percentage before the money worked its way back to Jacobsen, meaning by the time an original $1 million prize was fully distributed, it had often already been split 5 or 6 different ways among people who had never once stepped foot inside a McDonald's to earn any of it. The mechanics were surprisingly consistent across dozens of separate fraudulent claims over the years. Jacobsen would physically remove a genuine, valid winning piece during the print run, worth anywhere from $50,000 to a full $1 million. That piece would move through a chain of recruiters, essentially professional middlemen who specialized in finding willing winners, people usually needing money badly enough to accept an unusual, somewhat suspicious offer without digging too deep into where a supposedly random Frybox game piece had actually come from. The recruited person would then formally, publicly claim the prize exactly like a legitimate winner, complete with a smiling photo, a press release, sometimes even a small celebratory event, while quietly agreeing in advance to hand over a large negotiated percentage back through the chain of people who'd arranged it, eventually working its way back to Jacobsen himself. To the public, to McDonald's corporate office, to Simon Marketing's own leadership, it looked exactly like the system working perfectly, a random, lucky customer, thrilled beyond words, claiming a life-changing prize live on camera. By the time investigators finally reconstructed the full scope of the operation years later, the numbers were almost hard to believe. Between 1989 and 2001, prosecutors estimated that Jacobsen and his expanding network had stolen prizes totaling close to $24 million. Not some of the major prizes, nearly all of them. Investigators later stated that during certain years of the promotion, essentially every single prize over $25,000, including every one of the flagship $1 million top prizes, had been stolen and funneled through this exact same insider pipeline. For over a decade, the biggest, most exciting, most publicly celebrated wins in McDonald's monopoly history weren't lucky at all. They were criminal transactions wearing a smiling press photo as a disguise, while tens of millions of genuinely honest customers kept peeling stickers off fry boxes, funding a prize pool that had almost no real chance of ever reaching them. To understand how convincing this actually looked from the outside, it helps to walk through one single case the way investigators eventually reconstructed it. A recruiter identifies someone willing to participate, sometimes a total stranger, sometimes a friend of a friend several times removed from Jacobsen himself. That person is coached, sometimes quite specifically, on exactly what to say publicly, including a believable, entirely fabricated story about how and where they supposedly found their winning piece, because an insider handed it to me, obviously wasn't going to survive a press interview. McDonald's, acting in complete good faith, would then celebrate that win exactly like every other one. A press release, a company photo, sometimes local news coverage of an ordinary, thrilled customer whose life had just changed forever. Behind that same smiling photo, paperwork was already being arranged to funnel a large percentage of that prize quietly back through the network, eventually reaching Jacobsen, while the public and McDonald's own corporate communications team genuinely believed they were watching the system work exactly as designed. It's worth actually sitting with that $24 million number for a second. Spread out across 12 years, that's an average of roughly $2 million in stolen prizes annually, quietly siphoned out of a promotion that ordinary, honest customers were funding every single time they bought a meal. It means that for over a decade, the actual odds of a real customer winning one of the truly life-changing prizes weren't just slightly worse than advertised. For the biggest prizes, they were functionally close to zero because the pool of winners had already been decided before the game pieces even left the printing facility. Some analysts who later studied the case pointed out an uncomfortable statistical reality. Given how consistently the largest prizes were intercepted, it's entirely possible that during certain years of the promotion, not a single truly random customer ever won one of the flagship top prizes at all. The entire multi-million-dollar top tier of the game quietly existing as fiction for years at a time. The entire scheme finally began unraveling because of a single anonymous phone call to the FBI in 2000 from a man who identified himself only as claiming to have information about a rigged McDonald's promotion. Investigators initially treated the tip with reasonable skepticism. A fast food board game hardly sounds like typical FBI territory. But something about the specific details in that tip, apparently including insider knowledge that would be difficult for a random member of the public to simply guess, was compelling enough that agents quietly opened a preliminary inquiry. What they found in the early stages genuinely surprised them. Patterns in how prizes were being claimed that looked less like coincidence and more like an organized, repeating operation. That single phone call, from someone whose full identity remains debated to this day, eventually grew into one of the most unusual undercover investigations in the FBI's modern history. Rather than immediately raiding anyone, agents built an elaborate, almost cinematic undercover operation, nicknamed Operation Final Answer. Investigators identified individuals suspected of fraudulently claiming prizes, then approached them posing as a television production crew, claiming to be filming a feel-good documentary special about lucky, everyday McDonald's Monopoly winners. Flattered, and completely unaware they were actually being formally interviewed by federal law enforcement, several winners sat down on camera and cheerfully described, in specific, incriminating detail, exactly how they'd supposedly won, including details that directly contradicted the official, random nature of the game, sometimes casually mentioning being contacted beforehand, or naming the person who had arranged everything for them. Every single one of those interviews was quietly recorded as real evidence, destined for federal court, not television. It became one of the most creative sting operations in the FBI's history, catching people bragging about a fraud on camera because they genuinely believed the camera was there to celebrate them. Agents reportedly rented real production equipment, used a real film crew cover story consistently across multiple interviews in different states, and even discussed with some winners, doing individual segments about their personal story, coaxing out far more specific, far more incriminating detail than a standard law enforcement interview ever could, precisely because nobody being filmed felt like they were in any danger at all. Investigators later described it as one of the rare cases where the subjects of an investigation volunteered evidence against themselves enthusiastically on camera in high definition, because they thought they were becoming minor television celebrities instead of federal defendants. For nearly 2 decades after the arrests, this entire story remained a strange footnote mostly known only to true crime enthusiasts and people who happened to follow the original 2001 news coverage closely. That changed in 2020, when HBO released a documentary series about the case, finally putting faces, voices, and full context behind names that had mostly existed only inside court documents and a handful of newspaper articles for 20 years. Former FBI agents involved in the original investigation spoke publicly for the first time about the undercover documentary sting, and several of the actual recruited winners agreed to be interviewed, offering, decades later, genuinely conflicted, complicated reflections on decisions they'd made as much younger people. The documentary reintroduced this story to an entirely new generation who had simply never heard it before, turning a strange, mostly forgotten fraud case back into one of the most talked about true crime stories in recent memory. On August 22, 2001, after roughly a year and a half of careful undercover work, the FBI executed a coordinated series of arrests across multiple states. Jerome Jacobsen was taken into custody, along with dozens of others connected to the scheme, recruiters, family members, and individuals who had knowingly claimed fraudulent prizes. McDonald's corporate leadership has consistently maintained they had absolutely no knowledge the promotion was compromised, and were reportedly just as stunned as the general public when federal agents first informed them their signature marketing campaign had been secretly hijacked for over a decade. Simon Marketing, the agency directly responsible for securing the game, was hit especially hard, both by the scandal itself and by the immediate, obvious reputational damage of having employed the very person committing the fraud. McDonald's severed the relationship with Simon Marketing almost immediately after the news broke publicly. Jerome Jacobsen ultimately pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit mail fraud. In September 2001, he was sentenced to 3 years and 1 month in federal prison, along with a court order to pay back thousands of dollars in restitution, a relatively modest number compared to the total scale of what had actually been stolen over the years, since much of the money had already moved through so many hands it was never fully recoverable. Dozens of the other people involved, the recruiters and the individuals who had knowingly claimed fraudulent prizes, faced their own separate federal charges, with sentences ranging from probation up to several years in prison, depending on how directly and knowingly each person had participated. In total, the government's investigation and prosecution connected more than 50 separate individuals to the fraud network, an entire hidden ecosystem operating quietly underneath one of the most beloved and trusted marketing promotions in American fast food history. Not every single person who ended up charged was a hardened, calculating criminal. Court records and later reporting revealed a range of circumstances among the recruited winners, some who clearly understood exactly what they were participating in, and others who genuinely believed, or at least convinced themselves, they were simply accepting help from a well-connected friend or relative rather than knowingly committing federal fraud. Some had used their prize winnings for painfully ordinary things, paying off medical debt, covering a mortgage, helping a struggling family member, money that, however it arrived, had already been spent living a completely normal life by the time federal agents came knocking. It's part of what makes this story more complicated than a simple villain narrative. At the very top sat a calculated, years-long insider theft. But spread out beneath, it was a much messier web of everyday people making a decision, sometimes cynical, sometimes genuinely naive, that would end up defining the rest of their lives. One case that later stood out during the investigation involved a man in Florida who was approached by a family member already connected to the scheme and offered a genuine, fully legitimate-looking $1 million winning piece. He later told investigators he understood, at least in general terms, that something about the offer wasn't entirely right, but rationalized it anyway, telling himself the game pieces were technically real, the prize was technically going to get paid out by McDonald's either way, and refusing simply meant someone else would take the money instead. He accepted, claimed the prize publicly, paid the agreed cut back through the network, and lived for years afterward with money that, legally, came from an authentic McDonald's prize fund, but morally, and eventually legally, never should have reached him at all. That specific rationalization, that refusing wouldn't have stopped the crime anyway, shows up again and again across the case files of nearly everyone who agreed to participate. In the immediate aftermath, McDonald's moved quickly to distance itself publicly from the scandal, emphasizing repeatedly that the fraud was committed by an external contractor's employee, not by anyone inside McDonald's corporate structure itself. As a gesture of goodwill, and to protect the brand's reputation, McDonald's ran an emergency giveaway shortly after the arrests became public, handing out real, verified cash prizes totaling $10 million to actual customers, an attempt to symbolically make good on the years of trust the original promotion had built and then quietly betrayed. The McDonald's monopoly promotion itself didn't disappear. After a full security overhaul, with independent auditing and much stricter chain of custody controls around winning pieces, the game returned in later years and continues running periodically today, now widely regarded as one of the most heavily monitored promotional games in the entire industry, precisely because of what happened the first time nobody was watching closely enough. Step back, and the entire scheme rested on one single structural flaw, repeated constantly throughout stories exactly like this one. The person responsible for preventing fraud was the same person with unsupervised physical access to commit it, with no independent second check verifying his own work. It's the same underlying vulnerability behind bank fraud, accounting fraud, and insider theft cases across almost every industry, concentrating total trust in one single, unmonitored point of failure. McDonald's and Simon Marketing had built an enormously successful, hugely profitable promotion on a foundation of trust rather than verification, and it took 12 years, tens of millions of stolen dollars, and one anonymous phone call before anyone actually checked. It's a strange, specific irony that a game literally built entirely around the idea of luck ended up being decided, for over a decade, by absolutely nothing resembling luck at all. So here's the real question this story leaves behind. If a friend of a friend quietly offered you a genuine, verified, six-figure prize-winning piece, no real risk to you personally, just claim it publicly and hand back a cut, would you have said yes? It's easy to judge from the outside. It's a lot less easy sitting across from someone offering to solve every financial problem you have, in exchange for one smiling photo and a signature. That's exactly the position dozens of real people found themselves in, and their answer ended up defining the rest of their lives, for better and very often for much worse. There's a broader lesson sitting quietly underneath this entire story too, one that has nothing to do with fast food or board games. Almost every major fraud, whether it's a marketing promotion, a bank, or an entire company, tends to survive as long as it does for the exact same reason. Somebody trusted the wrong single point of failure and nobody double-checked. The next time something in your own financial life feels like it's simply running on good faith, a shared bank account, a business partner, a family member managing money on your behalf, it's worth asking the same question federal investigators eventually had to ask about a Frybox sticker. Who's actually checking, and what happens if nobody ever does? If this story genuinely surprised you, subscribe to Money USA, because we dig up the real stories behind money and trust that most people have never actually heard the full truth about, fully verified every single time. Drop one word in the comments right now. Would you have said yes or walked away? See you in the next one.